Tolkien has written a lot of really beautiful stuff, but is there a line in his work that is just the most beautiful, most profound? Well, I found one that is extremely beautiful for me. Hello, welcome to Intermerifica, New Mexico, the channel where we look at things of wonder from the perspectives of philosophy and theology, faith and reason. I'm your host, Daniel Kelly, and today what we're looking at for Tolkien's birthday is searching for one of his most beautiful lines. I was originally going to do this as one of my greatest of videos where we look for the greatest in a category. And I was like, what's the greatest thing Tolkien has written? What has he said? But the problem is there's just too much that Tolkien has done to do a truly comprehensive review would be like a 15-hour video. So instead, what we're going to do is look at what I think he does very well. Sometimes there's just one line. Obviously, his whole work is cool, but there's just one line that really can speak to you, a really short line. And there's one that just always sticks in my head as a line with just full of profound meaning. Before we get to it, though, we need some background, both from the cultures of the world and also from his own works, because it's a line that has a lot of meaning, but won't have a lot of meaning to some people if they're not familiar with the background. So the first thing we need to look at is in many cultures, there's this theme, maybe all cultures, I can't say all cultures, but this story where a couple that loves each other so much, and then one of them dies, and the other one has to go to the realm of the dead, the god of the dead, whatever, to plead before the god of the dead or something like that to get their spouse back. And it's a very common story. I'll take one instance of it from my background that to illustrate this. There's a story in Hindu culture of Savitri and Satyavan, and the story goes where they love each other, but Savitri, that's the lady, she gets this prophecy that her husband Satyavan is gonna die. And she gets this way, the person who prophesied to her says, okay, he can stay longer alive for a year longer if you fast, basically, live this fasting lifestyle. But after that, fate has decreed for him he's got to die. So she does do that fasting, and I think that's really powerful. And maybe I'll do a whole video on this story sometime. But so anyway, she fasts for that whole time, but after the year, he dies, and the god of death, Yamraj in Hindu mythology, comes and takes him. And she follows Yamraj, and she's just bugging him, and Yamraj is like, leave me alone, I'll give you this, and I'll give you that. And he keeps saying, I'll give you whatever you want, but not your husband. And she goes through these things, and she wants a happy life, and she wants lots of children and all this stuff. And so finally, she's like, he says, okay, one more time, I'll give you whatever you want, but not the life of your husband. And she's like, oh, there's nothing else you can give me because you're a liar, because you've said I'll have a happy life and all these children and stuff, but you have the only husband I'm ever going to have. And so then Yamraj has, and gives Satyavan back to her. And there's a lot more to the story, we could go through it a lot more, but that's just an example of a story that's very common through a lot of cultures. I mean, even the very silly and usually not very intelligent cultural phenomenon Family Guy, they have a story like that. I believe it's in the second season. I'm not as familiar with that, but it was pointed out to me that, oh yeah, that story's even in this. So that is a very, very important part of cultural stories. And why is that? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons, but as Tolkien pointed out, our stories reflect the story of God's love for his people. And these stories, I really do think, reflect the story, the Christian story, where God loves his spouse, the church, so much, he goes down to the depths of death, to the depths of Sheol, to the depths of hell, as we say in the Creed, to get his bride, the church, back from the depths of hell. So it's reflecting, that's it's such a deep, profound part of our hearts because it's a deep, profound part of the story, the main story in creation, right? So Tolkien understood this. So, of course, in his mythology, he has that story as well. So in the story of Elrond, most people are familiar, right, from Lord of the Rings. Elrond, well, his grandparents, one of his sets of grandparents, is this couple, Beren and Luthien. And it's one of the only stories. He has these three great tales in his history, known as the Silmarillion, these three great tales. And The Fall of Gondolin, which is one of my favorite stories ever, and The Children of Hurin are both really, really sad stories. But Beren and Luthien is a happy story in many ways. It's one of his own. He describes his stories in Middle-earth as the history of the long defeat, right? Where we just keep losing, basically, to Satan, in a way. That's what history is the history of the long defeat, according to Tolkien. But this is like a ray, this story is a ray of light in that. So I'm not going to go through the whole story right now, but I do recommend that you go read it for yourselves. But basically, it's the story of this mortal, this human, Beren, who falls in love with this elf, Luthien, but to win her, he has to do this crazy hard quest. There's these things in the Silmarillion, the most beautiful jewels ever, the Silmarils, the greatest treasure you could ever kind of get, and they've been stolen by Morgoth, basically, the devil. And he has to go to win her hand to marry her. He has to go get one of those, and nobody's ever gotten them, and how could a mortal do that? And there's this whole big storyline where he goes and does that. But the bad part is the end part of winning her and winning these treasures that have been taken, basically. They're these amazing treasures that the devil has stolen from humanity and even from the angels, right? He's taken that away from creation. But he wins, Beren wins those back from Morgoth, so that's amazing. But as part of that, he gets mortally wounded and he dies. Luthien is able to go to the Valar, right? Those are basically these angels, these divine beings in Tolkien's mythology, and she pleads for his life before Mandos. He's kind of like the god of the dead, or the keeper of the dead, the keeper of the halls of the dead, right? And so she goes to Mandos, and in different versions, how her pleading is described a little bit different ways, because Tolkien made a bunch of different versions for each of his stories. But the version I like is where she sings him a tale of moving love, and it just moves his heart that he has to give Beren back. But there's a condition, and the condition is different in the different versions, but it always involves she's not going to be immortal anymore. So she has this curse, basically, placed on her if she wants to be with Beren, and that's kind of the curse that happens to all the elf people that want to be with humans, right? That's kind of one of the central themes of the Lord of the Rings, is when Strider wants to be with Elrond's daughter, right? She has to give up being immortal, and it has a sad tone. Well, that's the same thing that happens. She has to give that up. And then sometimes in some of the stories, there's a different condition where they're not going to be able to interact with the story of humanity. Sometimes that's in the, or sometimes not, that they have to remove themselves, kind of, they'll go back to Middle-earth, but be kind of removed. So that's a very important story. And one of the things about this story of Beren and Luthien makes it difficult to describe well in summary and stuff is a lot of it Tolkien has in this epic poem, the Lay of Luthien, which is really cool but hard to summarize, because it's hard to summarize poetry. Poetry, the beautiful part of it is in the words. You can't. It's hard to paraphrase and stuff. But anyways, the main theme is that Luthien saves Beren from Mandos, from the halls of the dead. And that now we can come to the line that I think is the most beautiful of Tolkien's, well, or at least super duper beautiful, and it's not actually from any of his stories. It's from a letter that he wrote to his son, that he wrote to his son Christopher after his wife, Tolkien's wife, had died. He wrote this, and I think that it's really beautiful and really moving, and I'll read it here, and then we'll talk about why it's so powerful. So this is Tolkien writing after his wife has died. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. So why is this such a powerful line? Well, first of all, it's describing this great tragedy, this great pain that Tolkien's in after his wife has passed away. He's just in the depths of not despair, because he still has his Christian faith, and we'll talk about why this line means that, but this just total tragedy of the person he loved with all his heart has passed away. So why is this so important? Well, one of the things is when we suffer a really great tragedy, I find as Christians, one of the things that can be difficult is when people who don't believe try to commiserate with you or give you condolences and stuff. One of the things is they're missing the main theme. They're missing the most important part of the story, is the Christian part. So sometimes their condolences, you're like, yeah, but it's cool that they're condoling you and stuff, but it's like, you don't even understand, what can you know about this? Because you don't even understand the main storyline. But Tolkien in this, because he connects it to Mandos, yeah, he's got the main storyline. He knows it's connected to the Christian stories. He knows that these mythology is a reflection of the Christian story. All mythology is, all stories are. So he's connecting it to that great strand of Christian thought in our heart that connects to our hearts. So he understands. We know Tolkien understands the whole Christian story. He's one of the greatest Christian writers that's ever lived. He knows all that. But when we're in tragedy, sometimes and very often it's helpful to have somebody else who's gone through it before us, who or can go through it with us. And Tolkien's doing that in this line. We see our tragedies in that, because he doesn't offer, there's no solution offered there, because there isn't a solution. We know, we're like in the gospel stories. I know that my loved one will be back in the resurrection at the end of time, as you know, Lazarus' sisters knew that, but that's not what's hurting me. That's not what I want. So there's no solution offered. We already know. We already have that Christian hope. So there's no solution offered in this line. There's just that desolation, that profound desolation that in a way you can experience more when you have Christian faith. Just this deep desolation. And then there's connecting it to, so we know that the Christian story is full of hope, that Christ did win back his bride, but what good is that for us in this situation? As Tolkien says, I can't plead before Mandos. I know these stories are true, not in the sense of he doesn't think these are factual, but I know they're true on a deeper level, and he knows the Christian story is really factually true. But what good does that do me in this situation? So I find it so powerful, just this description of mourning. Tolkien knows all the Christian story. He knows all the stories of humanity. He knows the human heart so powerfully. But still there's that cry, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died, as from the Gospels. Lord, I know that you love me, but this person that I loved is gone, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's like the story of Job, where, yeah, God, if I argued with you, you'd be in the right. But that just makes Job's problems worse. I can't even argue with you, Lord. And so what's the solution? The solution is there's nothing to be done but to live through that with the tragedy. And I think Tolkien's line, that feeling of the story has gone crooked and I am left, right? That part of me, this whole story has gone crooked from what it should be. And we're left here without our loved one. And we can't plead our case. If we contend with God, like Tolkien says, I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. If we contend with God, he would be in the right. So why is this so beautiful? I think even healing, because the only way through tragedy is to suffer. And compassion is to suffer with. And the best thing, sometimes when tragedy has happened to us, is when somebody who we know is trustworthy, who we know knows all this, suffers with us. And in this line, I really think Tolkien does. And that's why I think it's just one of the most beautiful and moving lines in all of his work, and I love it. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you have a great celebration of Tolkien's birthday. You have a good day. God bless you.